Welcome into the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, timdennis. Got an extraordinary, fascinating show for you today, folks. We have an old friend coming back with us. Carl Abrahamsson is with us today. He has a brand new book out there called Meetings with Remarkable Magicians. Now, we've had Carl with us in the past, and he's had a fascinating life, folks. And I mean it when I say a fascinating life. You know, a lot of us, when we're young, decide we're going to strike out on our own, and we're going to kind of find our way in life, and we're going to find out what it is that we believe in. And we find out, you know, what we're going to do in life, what career we're going to take on, what we're going to believe in as far as theology goes. When Carl struck out, he grew up in Sweden, decided he was going to find an alternative path. With Carl, what's interesting, I want to talk to him himself and figure out how he figured out his theological roots. What's interesting is, you know, here in America, I think we pretty much, it's, you know, nailed into us from the beginning that you automatically take a more Christian route. So you automatically get nailed with, well, it's either going to be a Protestant or Catholic route, and you go, and that's it. And it's that, I don't want to say monotheistic type route, and you're gone, and that's it, and you go. But that's not the way it's looked at in Sweden. In fact, in reading this new book, I was fascinated with the fact that if you're Catholic in Sweden, it's not looked upon favorably, which I thought was very interesting. It's an interesting take, and it kind of opened my eyes. A lot of stuff in Carl's new book is very fascinating. Meetings with Remarkable Magicians, Life in the Occult Underground is the name of the new book. We got a link in the description of this program. Again, folks, the thing about this program is we love to open your eyes to everything out there in the paranormal supernatural. So I want to bring in our guest. Let me tell you a little bit about him before we bring him in. Carl Abrahamsson is a writer, publisher, magico-anthropologist, filmmaker, and photographer. Since the mid-'80s, he has been active in the magical community, integrating occulture as a way of life and lecturing about his findings and speculations. The author of several books, including Occulture and Source Magic, and the editor and publisher of The Fenriswolf. He lives in Sweden. We're also going to talk about his dealings with Anton LaVey, which are incredibly fascinating. Ladies and gentlemen, let's bring him into the program. Let's jump into it right away. Here, once again, into Darkness Radio, is Carl Abrahamsson. Carl, welcome back, my friend, to Darkness Radio.
Thank you very much, Tim. Thanks. Good to be back.
Glad to have you. So I want to jump into it right away because I was so fascinated by different areas of your book. The one thing that really got me and changed my worldview, because keep in mind, when you grow up in America, Carl, you're in this box, right? And you think everybody grows up the way you grow up because it's very single-minded, right? So you automatically think, okay, well, obviously, you know, I don't want to say indoctrinated, wrong word to use, but you think, well, you just, you know, you do what everybody else does. You grow up, you go to church, you play sports, you go to school. It's just the way things are. But growing up in a Nordic country, you don't necessarily worship a Christian God. And you're talking more about a Nordic God in your beliefs. And I found it kind of refreshing to read about your upbringing. Tell me a little bit about your upbringing when you were growing up and what it was that you initially believed in growing up.
Mm-hmm. Sure, absolutely. Well, the thing is that I think one can generalize, and when we talk about the Scandinavian countries, you know, look at it as one cultural sphere. But maybe I should talk mainly about Sweden, where I grew up. It's a secular country, meaning that religion is something very private. You know, focusing on that in the privacy of your own home and stuff like that. And of course, as is the case with Northern Europe, it's officially a Protestant country. So that's ingrained there, this kind of Lutheran work ethic is very, very ingrained in the Swedish psyche, and that I think is a good thing. But that in itself has very little to do with religion as such. It's more of a kind of an attitude towards life that I find a great resonance with. But in terms of Christianity, it's never really forced upon us. I mean, for instance, when school's out, the summer coming, we usually have kids singing and doing stuff in church, but that's about it. And also when the autumn semester is over and it's time for Christmas, it usually takes place in the local church and stuff like that. But it's never this indoctrination. And growing up as I did in Stockholm, which is the capital, in a sphere which was kind of highbrow and cultural, it's very little religion there. And I think that I have nothing to compare with. I can, of course, look at other zones that I've experienced throughout my life and say, whoa, there's a lot of religion here. And it can be for good. It can also be for bad, depending on how much freedom is given the individual. That's very important for me. And I think this thing with the Catholics, what I write in the book is that a friend of mine I worked together with was very interested in occultism, and we worked together with a publishing company we had. He sort of literally confessed and said that, I've gone Catholic, I've become Catholic, and I want to focus on that, and thereby I cannot really work with this kind of occult stuff. And I totally respected that. But it's interesting to see now that it's kind of like a fad or a trend, because there is no real Catholic culture in Sweden. It's very, very, very Protestant. And for a long time, there was actually, an unwritten law that people in the royal family should never marry a Catholic, because you don't know where the loyalty lies. Is it towards, the nation and the people, or would it be for the Pope in Rome? Right. There's something so cultic in the Catholic Church as opposed to the Protestant Church, that it becomes problematic when you have like heads of state and people in government. And so I grew up in a very, very, very secular culture, a very secular country, and I think that usually when one has this, I wouldn't say calling, but this kind of yearning to experience different states of mind and higher levels of consciousness, it must come from somewhere. And of course, I can't really pinpoint and analyze that where it comes from in my case. I think it has to do in part with exposure to a certain kind of culture. My parents let me roam free, let me indulge in whatever, comic books I wanted. Mm-hmm. We had many friends in the US. They sent me, not only Marvel and DC comics, they also sent me like underground comics with raunchy, sexy stuff and science fiction. And I was already, loving American movies. So I was kind of like interested in this kind of fantastic art, whether comic books or science fiction illustrations. That I think opened up something in me where I felt a very strong resonance. And I think that continued gradually with the movies, with TV, later on music, where the cultural expression in question had this ability to open the mind up, or open my mind up. And so I could have like a mini transcendental experience. It's very important. There I can sort of say that, those are my roots. It's not in religion proper. It's not even an anti-religion proper. I was never like for or against anything. So I would say it was a positive opening up, not a reaction against it. Okay. And maybe even because my parents were so secular that I did, as a kind of rebellion, look into more spiritual stuff. I don't know. That's that would be a psychoanalytical rabbit hole. But I think the culture, specifically this kind of music that emerged in the very late 70s and early 1980s, which was called the industrial music scene, which was very experimental, dark, atmospheric. But it was the great music, but it was also very tied in with kind of cluster of references, meaning people who made this kind of culture, made this kind of music, they shared their sources of inspiration, like for instance on record covers or in interviews. And there was a lot of stuff there about surrealism and experimental art, but also about magic and these people who did both. Crowley was one such example. Austin Spare was another. And that heavily influenced me in my mid my teenage phase. And I realized that this is something that I want to explore more than merely as a consumer of this kind of culture. So I have always been prone to writing. I think I early on knew that I wanted to become a journalist. I had fanzines, and the first ones were about comic books and comic book artists. So I met a lot of people and interviewed them. And then that moved on into rock and roll, garage rock, trashy films, all kinds of interesting stuff. So I've always had some kind of publishing venture going on as my umbrella in a way that I've been working with. Basically, I started interviewing some of these musicians who were in this scene, and we're talking about so many interesting things. And I realized, wow, these people are living, creating art, but they're also working magic. And of course, the most well-known person in this case would be Genesis P-Orridge, who was in the band Psychick TV, and who also had this magical order called the Temple of Psychic Youth. And this was for me completely mind-blowing in the sense that this was not a structure that was looking back in time. It was not Western ceremonial magic. It was not something arcane. It was nothing Kabbalistic, no ties to history. It was totally contemporary. And I think that that blew my mind, and I wanted to be involved, and I became involved and learned about how to work with an order in terms of administration and social context, but also the hardcore magical work. Those simply so many things to it. And that has been a pattern in my life also, not only to explore for my own good or for my own interest. I've always been engaged in stuff, engaged in groups, orders, societies, movements, and worked with it because I have been, and I still am, very, very interested in that kind of work. So I think thereby I have had more access than, for instance, a normal, member would have, because I've simply been, I have become gradually a protagonist. Mm-hmm. And on a personal level, it worked the same way. I started doing interviews with some people and talked about it. I'm incredibly fascinated. And then the rock and roll fanzine turned into an occultural fanzine called the Fenriswolf in 1989. Yep. And the Fenriswolf still exists. The issue number 12 just came out about a month ago. So that's always been with me also. Now it's a big fat book, but in the beginning it was like, a fanzine.
Right.
But it became like a door opener for me to have that. And I think that was part of the reason why I was welcomed so early on into these spheres and meetings with magicians that I had up until then only like fantasized about. There were many interesting twists and turns. But, basically around the time when I was 23 years old, I was suddenly knee deep in this incredible magical world with people that I'd only, read their books and sort of maybe one day I can be as cool as they are. But then suddenly I was with them and working with them.
Right. I'm going to take you back a little bit here, Carl. I want to get into the musical influence, first of all, of magic, and I want to go a little bit further back in the musical influence first. I want to talk a little bit and go a little bit further back, because you do cite in the book at one point, as you're getting to know Genesis and as you're getting into that sphere of influence, that you visit the grave of Brian Jones from the Rolling Stones. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It got my mind thinking a little bit, because as you're getting to talk about these different influences and starting to get immersed into the world of magic,
Yeah.
And you're talking about how you were influenced by Brian Jones. And I'm thinking about the Rolling Stones and the different rumors that were out there at one time. You think about, sympathy for the devil and all the things that were out there as far as the rumors that went around those different albums. What did you learn about Brian Jones and the different occult activities of the Stones? Was there anything that you were told personally about the Stones that had to do with the occult?
No, I don't think so. It's a very fascinating story, though. But in retrospect, I would say that basically the occult or occultism itself is so glamorous. You can talk to someone that you don't know and talk about the occult, and you will be, glamorizing those people, either pro or contra. They could be, oh, that's so interesting, or they could be like, zealots, religious zealots, saying, oh, stay away from me. However, the thing is that I remember when I started immersing myself in this material, both music, but also articles, interviews, and one of my first heroes in this sense was Kenneth Anger, the American filmmaker. Made so many beautiful experimental films, and he was also, devout Thelemite, being influenced by and working with Crowley's system for his entire life. He had dealings, he was at the time acquainted with the Rolling Stones, and I think that their friendship, just like Jimmy Page also had connections with Kenneth Anger, and that mere connection, when that was written about in music papers, in biographies, it makes people very interested, and there's a tendency there for people to project more on something they're fascinated by than perhaps what actually happened. And I think that's very much the case with Kenneth Anger and the Rolling Stones. Brian Jones was at this time already dead. He died in the summer of '69.
Yeah.
And for instance, Anger was at that concert in Hyde Park just a couple of days later and shot material, some of which was eventually integrated into Invocation of My Demon Brother, that film. And also the music for that film was improvised by Mick Jagger on an early Moog synthesizer. So that's very cool. So yeah, they did have dealings, but it was not really of an occult kind. I think also you have to take into consideration that no matter what actually happened in the case of the death of Brian Jones, I would say he was murdered by a contractor that he owed money. Yeah. But the entire, for good and bad, this was a time space that was influenced heavily by drugs, and not only by airy-fairy psychedelic drugs, but also heavier drugs and a lot of paranoia going on. And these people who were like demigods because they had fame and money could live completely freely, and that's not always a good thing. And I think that any projections about the Stones being, affected by the occult or cursed by anger, that's more on a mythical level. Jimmy Page, on the other hand, was actively interested in Crowley, and of course had bought Crowley's house, Boleskine, in Scotland, where Anger actually was allowed to come, and Anger was also allowed to stay with Jimmy Page and work in the basement of his London house. So there's more of an occult connection. But in terms of Brian Jones, I don't think he was that interested. I think he loved music. He was so talented and really a multi-instrumentalist, whereas I think the other guys wanted to be the rock stars. They wanted to go for that, full-on, as it's called, cock rock approach. Yeah. But I think Brian Jones was very much more experimental in his persona and also in his musical approaches. So, yeah.
Did Kenneth share anything specific with you about Jimmy Page actually channeling anything as far as the music went to put it directly into the music?
No, Anger didn't mention that. I've heard that from other sources, though, that basically Jimmy Page used occult techniques or rituals to, affect himself creatively. It is interesting, though, that the very first major edit version of Lucifer Rising that Anger made, was already in the early 70s, actually had a soundtrack by Jimmy Page. Also played on a kind of a guitar synth, one of the first models. And that's an incredible soundtrack, and I can really recommend people that they try to look for that. It should be online somewhere, or in some kind of bootleg form, or maybe even officially released. I don't know. But it's an amazing soundtrack that is so, it's not rock, it's not Led Zeppelin. It's just more of really a soundtrack. And that for me has always vibrated in the magical sense. It takes you to the zone, so to speak. And that together with Anger's amazing Lucifer Rising film, that blew my mind early on also. At that time, we could see it either at like the Stockholm Cinematheque or have third generation VHS dupes that were hardly, watchable. But still, it's a strong signal there that definitely, to me, was magical, literally magical. So, but Anger was not, when, all the times I talked to him and interviewed him, was never really interested in talking about, let's call it, failed relationships.
Yes.
He was kind of a mean and sardonic person in that kind of bitchy way that is so much fun to read in Hollywood Babylon, for instance. I love that tone. But it was obvious that, he was more, I guess, maybe narcissistic in a way. He preferred to talk about his own take on things and his own perspectives, and not so much about the people who had been involved. One example, for instance, was the first Lucifer in Lucifer Rising was supposed to have been Mick Jagger's brother. And he did try to shoot some stuff, even in Egypt with him, but it had to be canceled because Anger and him couldn't get along, so he had to get another Lucifer. So that was those kinds of stories Anger could share, because they are narcissistically related to, problems in his filmmaking and stuff like that.
Right.
But this kind of friendship or creative relationship, he was more reticent about that.
Interesting. I want to turn this back to you and your interests. So you've got those. I mean, you talk about the genre of rock and those. I'll just say occult influences. We'll put occult influences of the Stones and Led Zeppelin. So you could say that might be a little swaying, but you didn't go that way. You went towards. For the terms of the 80s, because we're about the same age, we'll say industrial. You went more towards industrial music. Was that more a regional thing for you? Was that more of a personal taste for you? Was that more of a, hey, I like this music better? That's where I'm floating towards. What swayed you to get into that type of music and compose that type of music?
Yeah, I think what happened was, from a chronological point of view, of course, it's a matter of taste. But from a chronological point of view, I was too young to experience the punk, first wave firsthand, which was like 1976 to 1978 or something like that.
Yeah.
I was too young. Yeah. But when I was 13, meaning 1979, I sort of, woke up to all the great music that was coming from both the UK and the US, meaning, what they call post-punk or new wave or these things. And that was like a whole world, opening up. Fantastic stuff. And in this, from this thing emerged the industrial music, which was basically very, very experimental, dark, primitive, do-it-yourself. And I love that because previously I think I had always loved basically weird stuff. Again, I think that was like early cultural imprints. My father ran a jazz club in Stockholm in the 60s. And he loved jazz, and there was also jazz around. Of course, I couldn't like that because he liked that when I was a teenager. But I think that could have influenced me also in this kind of, I wouldn't say infection, but it's just you get it rubs off on you, right. And if you listen to if you hear a lot of experimental jazz, I'm sure it rubs off in your mind, so that later at some point when you have matured as a human being, maybe you find a resonance with that. I think that's the case.
Oh, sure.
But most of the stuff in this industrial wave was it was kind of dark. It appealed to me. I felt the resonance. When you're a teenager, you're moody, you're soul searching. It's like a perfect soundtrack for it. But that, of course, wasn't the only thing. I mean, I listened to a lot of music, but not all of it had this fodder that was basically intellectual and then became magical as you moved into it more and more and more. And I would say that Genesis P-Orridge was the great pioneer in a way, but also the great guide for not only for me, but for a lot of people in the sense of synthesizing various strains of culture that were not musical necessarily and only musical. It could be many things woven into this cauldron that then took musical or written form.
There's something different about you, though, Carl, and that's this. Most people will take and they'll listen to their heroes on tape or wax or whatever they're listening to, and they'll say, I really admire that person. Someday I'd like to get to meet that person, right? And they might even manage to get a chance meeting and maybe get an autograph, or maybe they'll get to 5 minutes to talk to that person and say, I really admire your work. I mean, I once met Prince in a bathroom. Okay. Something like that. But rarely do they get the chance to meet, pick their brain, share philosophy, get to not only just share philosophy, but then study with them, become friends with them, share a lifelong relationship with them. I mean, that's truly a magical quality where you start to bond with that person. So what is it about you, Carl Abrahamsson, that has that higher power, that magical power to you that you were able to glom? I don't have the words, but glom onto Genesis P-Orridge and say, we're destined to bond. This is our life path. We're destined to be in the same life path and be together and move forward and create something special.
Yeah, I don't think there's a simple answer to that. And also, I think you could look at it on different kinds of levels. If we look at, for instance, my engagement with Genesis and the Temple of Psychic Youth and LaVey and the Church of Satan, and also my 30-year engagement with the OTO, meaning basically the Crowley vibe, I think that on one level, I have been very welcomed because I have been like a rare bird in these environments, in the sense that I come from an exotic place, from Sweden, and I'm, well versed, well read, well educated, eloquent, sort of like kind of very intellectual, and if I may say so, fairly bright person, and not so dark in a sense. I like to dress correctly. I like to, I like the good life. And I think that to many of these people was odd. That I was so, for instance, LaVey, for instance, we really clicked when it came to our tastes in movies. And I had been a film student at film school and knew so much about films that he liked very much. And I think that was one of the keys why he allowed me in, not once, but several times. And I think that my personal qualities as being this weird but bright kid from Sweden, that was something that was interesting to these people. And then, like I said, also, I got very engaged in these groups, in these people, and helped out with a lot of things, work, administration, all kinds of stuff, publishing, translation of their works. So in that sense, I have also been useful to them. But on a strictly magical level, which I think could be more interesting, that would still be true. But I think that what happens if you look at the moving on, the development of a certain spirit, it needs, in a way, not human hosts, but it needs a human culture to move on. And I realized this very much when I was working on my book, Meetings with Remarkable Magicians, because I had to go through decades worth of diaries and photographs and all kinds of stuff, my archive, and many things I'd forgotten about. But it dawned on me then that what I was doing was basically learning from my experience and my interactions with these people and other people as well, as listed in the book, and sort of, basically learning, but it was learning for a purpose, because now they're all dead. These people are all dead. Wow. I am thereby a kind of a host or a container of their energies and their spirits. And I don't really mean that in that, hocus pocus way, right. But you could call it like in an intellectual tradition or a magical tradition where you have a certain approach to the work of magic, for instance. Mm-hmm. And I have so many strains in me that I have now, in a way, synthesized. It's taken a few years, and I think this book was very helpful in that sense to write this book and to process that process. So now I feel that I'm totally ready to give back. You can say that you pay back in the sense, respect the elders, but you can also pay forward, move it along, shuffle that energy or that spirit or that cluster of magics along to a younger generation. And if you, saw in the book, I think I write in the introduction or something, that the working title was 2 times Saturn. Mm-hmm. Meaning that now that I've finished it, I'm very close to actually coming through my second Saturn return cycle, which means that I'm ready for a new phase. So in a way that was constructed by me to sync, to work on the book as is in sync with that process. And it's been very, very interesting indeed. So I think that, again, for them, I was a rare bird, very friendly, very helpful, a good worker bee. But I also felt that we did creative things together that was more than mere causal labor. Like with Genesis, for instance, we made 3 albums together, spoken word albums. We made 1 book. We made a documentary film. We traveled together. It was a real friendship. LaVey, I felt, was the same. I worked on translating the Satanic Bible into Swedish and publishing that, for instance. And LaVey was so kind and generous and supportive in terms of material for the Thefenriswolf, the early issues. And I've maintained the same kind of very friendly relationship with the Thechurchofsatan, who basically people that I knew already back then, who've been so supportive of my work. Kenneth Anger was a bit more odd, but we met with very regular, I would say irregular intervals, and he was very friendly and supportive also of whatever it was that I was doing. And I also made a documentary film about him. Yeah. And about LaVey too, I had. And then there was, again, as you know, the Anton, LaVey and the Thechurchofsatan book, which is like a spin-off from my documentary film about LaVey. So in that sense, I have summed them up. I have paid my respect, and now I have these things to show about them specifically for a younger generation. But I am now also my own, and working with my own writings, which could be seen as more technical magical writings, more like teaching in a way. And it's not emulating one specific strain. I have synthesized all these strains into my own. And that's exactly what I think a magician should do, unless, of course, he or she is of the kind that is literally occult, who prefers to stay in the hidden. There are many beautiful magicians I know who are doing that, and that's totally, worthy of respect. I, on the other hand, am a meta magician. I not only work my magic, but I also, my magic is about magic. So I have to sort of write about magic and lecture about magic, lecture about occulture, because that's my job. That's my assignment in this incarnation, if you will.
Tell you what, we're going to take our break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the difference between magic and occulture. What's the difference between the two? We'll get a little bit into magic and occulture. And I want to talk to you as well about what it is you took from each one of these people, how you made it your own. And we'll talk a little bit about the next generation. I want to talk about the next generation of magic, where it's going in the future, and what it is we hope to accomplish in the future. What is this all about? And how is it that we can improve the world with magic? Because right now, I don't know how it is you look at the world, Carl. I know how it is when I see the world right now, and I don't know how things get better through magic. So I want to ask you that question at the end of the program. So when we come back, we'll talk about all that with our guest, Carl Abrahamsson. The book is pretty remarkable, folks. I encourage you give it a good read. It's got some pretty remarkable stuff in it, and Carl has lived an amazing life. The name of the book is Meetings with Remarkable Magicians, Life in the Occult Underground. It is available right now. We have a link in the description of this program. Check it out. When we come back, we'll talk about how Carl has combined all of this experience with these different magicians. We'll talk about the future of magic when we come back with Carl Abrahamsson right here on the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Tim Dennis. Our guest is Carl Abrahamsson. The name of the book is Meetings with Remarkable Magicians, Life in the Occult Underground. Our guest, like I said, Carl Abrahamsson. It's a wonderful book. Carl's had a very rich life with a lot of famous people and has picked up a lot of valuable experience in the dark arts. We'll put it that way. And has built a rich body of work himself. We talked about the Thefenriswolf, which is his fanzine that he built. First of all, before we launch back into magic, you touched on one of my favorite subjects, your comic book. So you mentioned Marvel and DC. I'm gonna take a sidebar here for a minute here, Carl. First of all, I got to ask you top 3 favorite Marvel books, top 3 DC books, and then we'll move on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's going to be a little bit hard, I think, because very early on, I told you that my parents had a lot of American friends, and they sent me American candy and American comics and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I do remember having both DC and Marvel stuff, and it was great. I particularly liked the coloring on this sort of pulpy paper. I don't know why, but my preference was always, again, to the more bizarre stuff, not the mainstream comics. Sure. But for instance, like Robert Crumb and Gilbert Shelton. Big favorite was Richard Corbin and Bernie Wrightson. Yes. These draftsmen that were just amazing because they were not like run of the mill. If you had, the Mighty Thor or those kind of things, kind of predictable. And I did like it in the sense that I could like to, watch kind of a mainstream movie, an action movie. That was great. But I always favored the weirder stuff. Mm-hmm. So I don't think I can even give you 3 top Marvel or DC things. But
you got just one favorite from me?
Swamp Thing a major? That was on DC, right?
Yep, Swamp Thing was DC. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And I love Bernie Wrightson, and he was, making such great art also in both spheres, both in the sort of the underground. The same thing with Richard Corbin, I think, also. Yeah. I'm not sure he worked for Marvel or DC, but he did some more mainstream work that was incredible. And that also got me into the heavy metal, not the music, but the magazine.
The magazine,
even
right.
the French. I even got the French version. You could buy that in Stockholm, actually, Metal Hurlant, which then became heavy metal, I think, or if it was the other way around. But anyway, great stuff. It was like fantasy and sexy stuff and, really amazing stuff and such good art. Yes. That really blew my mind more than the mainstream stuff of Marvel and DC.
So did I read, too, that you knew Mobius?
No, but in the first fanzine I had, which was called Splash, this was before the rock and roll stuff. Splash had, I think, 3 issues. One was about Morris, who did the Lucky Luke comic, and the other one was André Franquin, who made Spirou and Gaston Lagaffe, great French comics. And the third one was Jean Giraud, Möbius.
Okay.
So I never met him. I think that interview was done over telephone
Oh, but still.
in France. Yeah.
Yeah, but still. Wow. Okay. So I just had my geek out fan moment. There you go. So
Oh. I
yeah,
loved Möbius, and I still do. And I mean,
yeah,
also taking into consideration how he worked so tightly together with one of my, magical and cinematic heroes that I haven't met yet. He's still alive, Jodorowsky.
okay,
They worked so closely together with Möbius in what's it called, Arsach, and these other comic book projects they have.
yeah.
Fantastic stuff.
See, I've got one American comic artist and writer I still want to meet, John Byrne. Never, and again, that's a X-Men, Alpha Flight.
Mm-hmm.
That's my guilty pleasure. I know he doesn't do very many Comic Cons or anything like that anymore, and he's kind of gotten old and a little grumpy, but that's my guilty pleasure. If I ever won the lottery or anything, he would do a mural on my wall if I could get him to do it. But that would be, or just draw the transfer and I'd have an artist paint it, but that would be, that'd be my guilty pleasure. But yeah, that's I'd love to have some original art from John Byrne, but some of the 80s X-Men stuff. But okay, I've geeked out enough on you. So before the break, we were talking about the difference between magic and occulture. I know we've thrown those terms out there, and it for the average layman out there that doesn't know what we're talking about. What are the difference between the two terms?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that magic, for me, is very, very central to human existence, both on an individual level and also on a bigger, larger cultural, societal level. And that's basically what I called source magic in the book Source Magic, for instance. This heritage we have from original shamanic days, cave days, when we were really tribal, trying to survive, and we had to find information about how to survive, not only by fight or flight, but also higher levels of consciousness that provided us with information. We didn't really know where it came from. And, you could say that it comes from outside, but I believe more that it comes from inside, a deeper connection. So I think the roots of magic lie there in that original shamanic heritage that we all carry. Deeply embedded in our DNA. Mm-hmm. And some people can tune in to the various cultural manifestations that still exist. Some are mythical, some have died out and then been revived, some are actually unbroken. Some took turns, became, natural sciences, some became astronomy. Basically all the facets of human culture has some kind of magical origin. But I think what you're after is the magic of magic. And for me, that is very much when I was in a kind of a highbrow mood, I defined it as that magic is a mind frame that allows for all definitions of itself, meaning of magic, to pass through itself, meaning there's a sense of tolerance, there's a sense of non-denominational perspective, meaning basically magic can be different things for different people. But I say that I would say that it has to do with working with an intent. You want to change something, mm-hmm. and you use something that is more than causal, more than just cause and effect, because that's not necessarily magical. It's something else. I believe also that there needs to be a sense of experimental things. If you repeat and repeat and repeat, it becomes more like a ceremony, not necessarily a ritual. But you do go into this moment of, again, here, transcendental experiences. Magic happens when you are in a liminal state, high or low or in between. You're not just in your rational mind frame. And in this transcendental state, which can, of course, be constructed or manifested in so many different ways, that's when you spill the beans. That's when you sow your seed. That's when you state your intent. And that's a very schematic way of looking at it. And this has, of course, been embedded in what we call occultism, various kinds of occultisms. There is ritual. There is the gradual revelation of secrets, either for real or not, and I think should be a personal process, but it doesn't hurt to, generate your own experiences together with other people, mentors or teachers or friends or whatever, then that's fair and fine. Whereas occulture is the merging of the occult and culture, how occultism and occult strains of culture sort of move into the mainstream culture. And we are seeing a lot of that these days, and have for a couple of decades now. And that leads me to one of my central strains of thinking, in a way. Why is this happening? It's not a fad. It's not just Hollywood making another series about teen witches, or, maybe the 10th or 11th Harry Potter film, whatever. It's much more than that. There's simply so much going on in music, in movies, in literature. And I believe that it has to do with a sense of emergency in a connection with what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious, telling us that we need to wake up to a world of magic so that we can change our mind frame and behave in a different way that will not lead to our extinction. Because the causality of the materialism and disrespect for all kinds of life on this planet we will be its victims. There will still be many, species of cockroaches and tougher things. The planet will be fine, but we won't. So I think that this wake-up call that I perceive the general occulture is, it's a wake-up call, and I think we have to face it. And the problem here becomes cultural, because when I say we, basically mean you and me. Now, we're in a Western cultural sphere where we have freedom and we can talk about these things and juggle terms, but not everyone has that, because most people are, live in more repressive societies, and they can't really wake up to magic that could be dangerous for them, like in a repressive religious society, for instance. But still, it doesn't need to be expressed verbally or even in antagonistic behavior. It can just be in tiny changes you do in your own life, showing respect for nature, indulging in nature to learn more, and just to become a fuller kind of human being. And I think that's the reason why artists produce stuff that contains occulture. They might not even be consciously aware of why they're doing it. Artists are usually like, antennae, in a way, feeling things that are in the ether or the zeitgeist in the contemporary, sphere. And then they churn that through their grinders, and then something comes out that is part of this general wake-up call. I find it highly fascinating, and that's why I do spend so much time writing about it, lecturing about it, and talking about it.
I have an unusual question for you. I want you to bear with me as I get through this entire question, because I'm not trying to blow your mind by any means here, Carl. And I'm not trying to offend your senses here, but with this question either. So bear with me as I get through it. In the book, you state you're definitely no Christian, and in fact, if anything, you're probably anti-Christian, correct? And to kind of sum up what you're saying here with the occulture theme, in the Bible, it's kind of funny. Jesus performs miracles, which for all intents and purposes is magic, right?
Yeah.
So, and in that, he tells his people, all these things that I do, you can do as well, right? So he basically tells his people, you can do it. People have been reading the Bible for thousands of years, yet they refuse to believe it. They think, well, Jesus is up here and he can do all this stuff, but no, that's Jesus. He does that. I can't do that, right? Why is it that people can read the Bible, they can go to church, and they say, well, Jesus can do that, but I can't do that? Why is it that people refuse to believe that Jesus, who's the ultimate magician, could do that, But I go to church every Sunday and I can't do that. But yet the words are right there. If I can do it, you can do it. Why are people not believing? They're receiving that word, but they're not believing it. It's right there.
Right. That's the question. Because I think I do have an answer for that.
Okay.
And that's the fact that, for instance, in early Gnostic Christianity or the Gnostics basically that coexisted with the formation of the first Christian churches, I think that was their message. You go through God direct. You don't need these proxies. You don't need these things. Meaning you could have this, again, then let's call it the magical energy straight from the source. They chose to call it something that was suitable for their cultural background with their discourse, their words, etc. But then, of course, it becomes problematic as human societies became problematic, meaning more people, more structure needed, more administration needed. We need proxy people, we need priests to explain to people what the word of God is. And again, regardless of which religion we're talking about. Mm-hmm. And I think that is no gender thing meant here, but it's an emasculation of the individual, in the sense that, so this person over here is cutting off my direct pipeline with the source, and then of course transgenerationally people accept it, and then it becomes tradition, and it becomes also, I would say, almost inert traditions that we can see now, where it no longer means anything. It's just like a rigid control structure that leads to frightful things on a daily basis, in terms of indoctrination of politics, in terms of indoctrination of individual liberties, indoctrination of it's just not good. And the reason for that is that they have lost touch with their source magic. I believe that some of those people believe in whatever it is that's, presented in the Bible, for instance. I believe that they believe in that. But so many people don't. They are just obeying the structure in itself because there's safety in numbers, there's safety in being with the herd in a way, or the crowd. And there's really inherently nothing wrong with that. But I don't think it fulfills any real religious thing, because I can't see any real religious experiences there. It's just like, routine. And you accept the power structure as it is, even though the structure may be corrupt or criminal or whatever. It's just something you do because everyone else in your family has done it for hundreds of years. And that's not good enough. And that's why I think that the source magic, or what's needed now, is a personal transcendence, a personal transcendental thing. And I don't necessarily mean that everyone has to embark on an ambitious magical path. I just want people to be very true to themselves and value what they themselves find on the inside. And that is one of the messages in my book, is that why let someone else step on your sense of joy? If you hear a message from your inside, it's you talking to yourself. It's not God, it's not a demon or Satan or whatever. It's basically you can have many beautiful conversations with deeper levels or higher levels of yourself. Mm-hmm. And that's where you find the truth about yourself. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you can get really interesting insights in conversation with other people, but you're always closest to yourself. And if you don't start working with yourself, then I can't really see you going anywhere in terms of becoming a really substantial player in the field. Usually the major protagonists of culture have been rebels, have been truth sayers, have been fiercely creative people who just don't give a damn about what the control system tells them. If they, it used to be, punishable by death, like in medieval times, to be a scientific, pioneer or a philosophical pioneer or an artist even, who went when you go against the grain. Luckily, that's not the case so much now, at least not in our cultural sphere. But there are very repressive areas on this planet where it's like medieval times still. And that's a shame. And I think that's very counterproductive to what needs to happen. And that's a general planetary awareness in more people.
You talk about that planetary awareness. Now, you're also talking about people stepping outside of themselves, though. And you're talking about, in one respect, going inside yourself, finding that magical ability and then manifesting it. But at the same time, you're talking about some people who can't get out of their own way, in other words, being narcissistic, and then trying to look out for the greater good of others, which they might not have that capability, which is hard for some people to do, a lot of people to do. I don't want to say the world is narcissistic. That's a very singular vision that I think is almost a nihilistic view, right? But there's a fair amount of people out there that don't look out for other people, right? I mean, they're kind of me first and then everybody else type deal. And I think it's kind of gotten us in trouble, don't you think, Carl? I mean, we're not in a great place in the world right now. Would you say that?
Yeah, no, I don't think we're in a great place. But then again, there's always this pendulum movement where things become repressive and then they become slightly more liberal. And it just seems to be an ongoing process. And it's very difficult to look at a planet as one being. But it was kind of interesting, though, during the pandemic. There were changes, albeit temporarily, but there were changes in terms of, air traffic, intercontinental, transactions, physical transactions. And that actually worked. And scientists could tell that, well, there's suddenly less of this pollution here and less of this pollution there. And that was like, whoa, that's really fascinating. Isn't this what we should try to strive for? But then, of course, the pecuniary spirit, greed, basically, as soon as it was lifted, as soon as it was, let's get back to normal. And not for the sake of, some kind of joy of life, that maybe have been one part of it, but it's basically to get back to the money making in terms of, commerce, air traffic, general logistics, supply chain ecstasies. And I think that it just went to show that it's possible to change things. All you have to do is have some kind of overarching emergency. That I find sad. That maybe for people to wake up and help other people, for instance, if there's a crisis, like right when we're talking, it's about to be a crisis in Florida because of the weather and a storm. And I think that most people, even those who have been affected very, very much, maybe, losing their homes or getting hurt, they will be very prone to help other people. That's the neighborly spirit that comes in crisis. And that's a beautiful thing. And that sort of gives me a little bit hope. But it's very unfortunate that it's only there in times of crisis, or in moments of absolute, disaster, where you can, be neighborly.
Right.
So I think that many of the religious philosophies that have become the major ones, they sound okay on the surface and as dogma, but it's really not worth anything if you can't apply it on a day-to-day human level interaction basis. So that's why I think that maybe it would be a better thing to not think so much about the structure of handling religious experiences, but let that be something utterly personal. Let people work with, with magic or with polytheistic pantheons or atheistic philosophies, whatever, yoga, meditation, Crowleyan magic, all kinds of stuff, whatever floats the boat. But the main thing is that the person experiences it on a level that affects her. It's not wholesale, not 10 easy steps, not, hammer over the head, not invest with a funny hat and say, now you've got it. it has to come from the inside. And how that comes, that must be each and everyone's, path. It could be a short path, it could be a lifelong path. It doesn't matter. But as long as the attempt is there, meaning, I guess you could call it striving to become a more open-minded and tolerant person. That's really what it's about. And when you do that, when you take those first steps, I think the proper magic will arrive, the magic proper for that person in question, depending on cultural background, possible earlier religious background, mental capacity. I think since it comes from the inside, everything will be adapted in a perfect way. But each and everyone has to make that determined decision to change in that way.
Yes, I do. Is there a real fear, though, Carl, as we start to talk about the future of magic and where magic goes moving forward from 2024 on, and as you're taking the gifts that you've been given from past generations by some truly gifted people, and you move forward and you dispel that knowledge onto the future generations, is there an issue with perhaps this future generation becoming more singular and not using those gifts in the proper way? Is there that fear that maybe it all goes astray or it goes in a sideways direction?
Right now, I can't see that. You could argue, and I could certainly argue it, and I have, growing older or slightly older, in the sense that, kids today, they're so, in the screen and they're so fragmented and they're all so prone to self-diagnosis and whatever. And that's all technology's fault. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's all bad. That's just how life and culture is right now. Just like, I'm sure that my parents or grandparents thought whatever I was doing was horrible when I was doing it as a youngster. That's just, the normal flow of life and generations. I think that one thing that is good for potential survival in this sort of new generation is actually the technology. And I mean, the internet and this hyper integrated fast communication devices. And also spirit, it's almost like kids are born with this inherent knowledge of how to deal with these gadgets. And I think that could be interesting. I also think that AI could be interesting in the sense that it's a very swift communication with a power bank, with an immense library, which is, faster and more elaborate than Googling, than just merely Googling question. You could have different kinds of approaches. And I think as a magical technology, it can be fantastic because you can weave in, for instance, in classical sigil making, you can make these elaborate composite images or even AI generated films that play up your desired scenario in ways that you could never do because you're only an amateur filmmaker or you're not even a filmmaker, but you want to work with a ritual that has this widescreen, beautifully shot video of you achieving your goals, for instance. That kind of technology is already there, but those are tools. Those are tools and they're fantastic. So in that sense, good for you kids, work with that. However, I think that there is a kind of estrangement in the technological sphere from nature proper. And what I mean by nature proper is both greater nature, meaning, forests, natural habitats, whatever, but it's also inner human nature. They need to be connected. They cannot be separated because separation means death. And again, not necessarily for greater nature. Greater nature will always survive, bring out new species, mutate as it always has. We will be the victims of this separation. And there, I think, might be a problem in the existing generation now that's coming up towards, maybe formulating themselves in a magical way. If they are too much in the symbolic, meaning what they can create with this digital technology, they lose touch with greater nature. And that is, it's not an equation, but I see that as a potential threat to their well-being. Because if you cannot oxygenize yourself in a forest or if you can't stick your fingers down in the dirt or sow some seed properly, then you're missing out on the essential, not only joys, but keys of surviving. You can't survive in the screen alone.
That leads me to my next question, because it seems like AI is kind of co-opting and corrupting everything that is human. You look at how it's taken over everything from writing a term paper to taking over automation to even flying fighter planes, whatever we can get it to do, Carl. Do you foresee a day where we could create the first AI magician? Something that doesn't need nature, something that could cast its own spells. It could be its own golem. It could be its own whatever. It could totally take over its own self and essentially be its own autonomous magician.
Absolutely. Very interesting. And I think you're mentioning something here that I have been working with for about a decade now, and that's what I call the mega golem. Originally, that was like an art project, intangible, invisible, inaudible, just something that artists could and magicians could invest with whatever they wanted into the mega golem's body. At first, it was, I don't know, not definitely not a joke, but it was kind of an experiment to see if I got a response, and I did. People, not everyone told me what they'd done, but they had done something. And for me, in my psyche or in my perception, it grew as a magical being. And I've written about it at length also in this Remarkable Magicians book. That's kind of a schematic example of what you're mentioning here. I have not yet used AI as included in the Mega Golem. I guess I'm more old school. I have some sculptures and I have some writing and I have some visual art. And I also have some unknown stuff that other people have put in it. But it is interesting because it's basically how, let's call it, otherworldly magic has always functioned. Or let's call it psychic magic, where you work with, for instance, so-called god forms or spirits, and they take on form. Where is that then? Is it objective? Not really. It happens in our psyches as we're working the ritual. You visualize things, or like in Tantric Buddhism, for instance, have these incredible vistas that you have to visualize in your meditation and your work in order to find a way. That's all, I would argue, symbolical of unlocking things within your own psyche. That's really high magic. But I think that using any tool that you have access to, it can be both beneficial and detrimental. It really depends on your own approach and your own investment into it. So I think that AI is very tricky. I mean, it's basically just an abbreviation, 2 letters, but we have seen it grown exponentially so quickly. And that, I think, is what scares people, is that if it's becoming smarter and smarter and can formulate things in a better and better way, isn't that dangerous? Potentially, yes, absolutely. But still, it's a matter of in whose hands these computers actually are,
Right.
Because not everyone is an altruistic, idealist hoping for the best for the entire planet. Most of these people who literally generate these AIs are tech bros. They're in it for the money. They're in it for the power trip. And that could be more dangerous than the technology in itself. Again, it's like this gun and the gun user parable in a way. Is it the gun or is it the gun user? I don't know. And I don't know about AI either, but it's here, it's here to stay, and it's going to keep developing, and it is going to become more integrated in human life because it's so appealing and cost effective in a way. So those things usually win out.
Right.
But then will that give more people more time to, for instance, go into nature or go into meditation? I don't know. Maybe we'll create new kinds of human slaves. We have yet to see. I don't know. In general, though, as I said, I think that all technology is usable. And for magicians, I think it's a good way to look at whatever you have.
Mm-hmm.
Some people have a lot, other people have very little. The magicians that are kids, or the kids that are magicians, they play with sticks and stones.
Right.
And they use that to create their own universes. And it works.
Yeah.
We can all remember that. So in that sense, not very much is needed to create change. And that's why I used to believe in the outer, that things existed in the outer,
Yep.
but I'm much more prone now to accept the psychological reality of magic.
The one thing that, with anything having to do with AI, that makes me skeptical is the fact that they haven't worked out the fact that there's the occasional lie in AI where it doesn't quite tell the truth. And what concerns me when it comes to anything magical is it has to be truthful, right? 100% truthful.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think maybe AI is not a great reflection of ideal magic, but it's certainly reflective of human beings, because human beings lie a lot.
True.
So in that
Very
sense,
true.
there's always a lie somewhere.
Very true. Very true. Let me ask you this before we leave people today, Carl, and that's this. When it comes to healing the planet and healing ourselves, is it time? There's something about time. There's an interesting quote about time. And what is that quote that you have in the book about time? I'm trying to remember. There's three things about time in the book. Time is the great...
Yeah, I can see if I find it. It's from Genesisporridge, a kind of a poem that it goes like this. First it is, then it knew it was, and that was it. And it is short for imaginary time, not the linear time. So I think that was something that we did a lot, and Jen was a master at that, writing that kind of almost koan-like poetry, dealing with heavy magical topics. Mm-hmm. And then you sort of dawned on you later on, like, wow, now I get it, or wow, that was so amazing, in a kind of psychedelic way. So that's it. First it is, then it knew it was, and that was it. Where it is imaginary time. And so that's a psychedelic one for you.
And then at one point, you and another colleague had also wondered if time wasn't also a being. Do you remember that point in the book?
Yeah. That was also Jan. We did a lot of that kind of magical philosophy speculation. Yeah. I don't know. I think as I think maybe the same for you, as time passes, it really does pass. Yeah. I can feel it daily. I can see it in my reflection and in photographs and stuff like that. Whoa, is this me now? Especially after having gone through so many photographs of when I was younger. It's very interesting, but it's also brutal. It's a brutal thing. So I wouldn't go so far to say that it's a being that would almost be tangential to some kind of god in a way. But basically, it's just movement. I think maybe that's a better, this movement and this rhythm in all what we can perceive with our senses. And I, for one, I like my senses. I like to perceive things with the senses. I can see that the sun rises, and then later in the day, the sun sets. That's good enough for me. Yeah. And I see a regularity. I see a rhythm. I see that in myself. Oh, it's dark. I get tired, fall asleep, then I wake up.
Yeah.
Not necessarily when the sun goes up, but anyway, there's a daily rhythm that is the fundament of a human life, and I accept it. So I don't see it necessarily as a kind of a being. It's just a natural progression of energy. Energy can never be still. It needs to be moving. Otherwise, it becomes, whatever it is, becomes inert, and inertia is death. But even death is not static. You immediately decompose. So something is always going on.
So with that, there's a saying that time heals all wounds, but magically, there's the ability to potentially help heal that wound, right? Mm-hmm. So what's better, to magically try to heal that wound, or to let time take over and try to heal that wound?
Oh, I see no conflict at all. I think as a magician, it is your duty to heal whatever needs healing. And I'm not saying that on any kind of sort of altruistic stance. You can absolutely say no to healing someone that you don't feel needs to be healed. You are still a human being, an individual, etc. But when healing needs to be done, you should absolutely heal, meaning work with whatever you have to rectify a situation, whether it's an actual illness or an imbalance, or in a greater scale, affect things so that they become more balanced and healthy. But that requires collaboration with time, because things take time. That's a weird expression. Things take time. Processes take time. And I guess what that means is just simply that no results are instant. Even instantly, that's an illusion too, because it's kind of a micro time there. So I think there's no conflict. Healing over time could be also healing. Let the healing go through time. You can express it. That's just everything is wordplay, But I think I read something. I think it was the German author Ernst Jünger that I really like. He's a beautiful philosopher and author. He wrote something about that. All the human fears are only facets of the real fear. We only have one fear. That's the fear of dying. Because we know that it's inevitable. You will die, I will die. It's a sad thing, especially if we like our lives. And at our age, we have probably seen a bit of death, parents or older relatives, and it's brutally sad. But it's just part of life, And if you can be honest and sober about that realization, then at least you have tempered that fear a little bit. And if you can actually overcome that fear, which I think no one really can, but ideally, then no other fears would really be valid. Or are you afraid of getting a parking ticket? Are you afraid of getting beat up? Or are you afraid of political changes? The only real fear that exists for humans is the fear of death. Everything else is just facets. And I think that's a pretty good perspective.
Let me ask you this, Carl. I don't know if we tackled this when we talked about LaVey or not, but we might have. I think I might have asked you at the time, do you believe, or where you believe LaVey thought he was going when he died or whatnot? But where do you believe, Carl, when you die? Do you believe in an afterlife? Do you believe that there's another place after this? And what do you believe it is?
That is a very good question, because I'm definitely not a materialist, in the sense that lights out, that's it. I think working with ancestors, whether biological ancestors, or as we call them, adopted ancestors, could be people who have influenced us, like my mentors, for instance. I call them now adopted ancestors in a way. And me and my wife, we have like an ancestor altar where all of these are placed in photographic form. And when you work with it, of course, again, you could argue that, yeah, it's in my own psyche, right? But they do take on a reality. They do take on form, because in the moment of, let's call it, quotes, devotion or integration and ritual, then they do take on a bit of materiality, because I, as a magician, allow it. Could be a conversation, could be psychodramatic, play or whatever. So the living give the dead life, and on the most primitive form, that would be memory. I remember people who've died, thereby they exist in a way. And I think LaVey wrote in the Satanic Bible that people will live on in the memories and the sinews of those who were positively affected by them, something like that. And that's true, of course. That's basic human coping skills. But I do believe that we keep people alive to a greater extent in our magical minds. However, when we die, what happens then? That is just pure speculation. And I think for me, that's in a way a bit like this psychedelic conundrum when you're high and you think about, oh, what's beyond space? What's beyond where space ends? You can go mad thinking about those things.
Right.
But what I mean is that I think maybe it has to do with the daily form. If I'm in a certain kind of mind frame, I would just think that, well, that's it, then it's over. And if something else happens, that's great, maybe. Or I could have a more Eastern oriented cap on and say that, yeah, I believe in reincarnation. I've experienced so many weird things of, not visitations, but, energies, evoking memories, that kind of stuff, that maybe there is something to it that we live on and take on new form. Science would actually argue, would be for that,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that energy is indestructible, and our awareness, our consciousness must surely be energy as much as our corporal being is. That I believe. But where it goes, I don't know. Maybe we just go back to, again, maybe some kind of source magic, like a bank, and then there's a bank teller or a bank clerk who disposes of this magical energy in different forms where it's needed. I don't know.
It's, yeah. The only other follow-up I would have to that is, in the book, you do cite that you had experimented with psychedelics when you were younger. Did you ever see anything under those psychedelics that would make you think that maybe you had reached out and maybe touch one of those realms?
Yeah, but only in the sense that it sort of created a pretty strong holistic fundament, and a holistic fundament is, everything's one, everything's connected. You can, in that state of mind, you can see energy projected out, and you realize that we are connected. We are all connected. It's not necessarily via the cerebral thing, like some human internet, or that kind of reflection, but we're really part of the same being, and the being here would, I guess, be the planet, and that's why it's important that if we want to be these beautiful beings that exist on this planet, we have better change ourselves, because the planet as such, as a larger, more powerful organism, might just shrug us off. Might just, you're too much of a nuisance, get off my planet, literally.
Yeah.
And I think that, I don't know. Yeah, so holistic awareness, absolutely, but going to other like zones or into space or something like that other people have talked about, I have not come across that. I usually cock an eye when people talk about, like Crowley, about these astral intelligences from outer space and whatever. I don't think that's necessary to go there, because for me, it's a psychological reality. Like I said, you can project stuff out there and claim that it's something objective, but I, for one, don't want to lose any time or energy speculating about those things, because my work is cut out for me here on my thankfully invisible, very messy desk, and that is my universe.
Yeah.
And I work my holistic magic from here, and I'm very, very happy to be able to do that, because I know that people are inspired by reading books like Meetings with Remarkable Magicians and the earlier ones, because people write me and tell me. So that makes me very happy, because it creates a feeling of not working in the dark,
Yeah.
Which sounds strange for an occultist,
No.
but where you can actually communicate with people who have, similar or dissimilar experiences, and talk about these issues that I actually believe are very, very important. They are vital, quintessential for the survival of the human species.
And that's an excellent place for us to jump off. So there you go. Meetings with Remarkable Magicians, Life in the Occult Underground is the name of the book. The author is our guest today, Carl Abrahamsson. Carl, I want to thank you so much for spending time with us today once again on Darkness Radio. I wish you much success with the new book, my friend.
Thank you, Tim. Lovely to be here again, and I look forward to the next time already.
Absolutely, as do I. So thank you so much for being with us today. Appreciate it.
Right.
Thanks. I want to thank Carl Abrahamsson for being on the program today. The name of the book is Meeting with Remarkable Magicians, Life in the Occult Underground. It's available right now in the description of this program. It's also available by Inner Traditions. That's the name of the imprint that has the book. So I just want to take a quick time out here to address the people in the audience that may be writing me furious emails right now. I'm just going to stop you, tell you to save your fingers from future arthritis. I've had Carl on in the past. I find Carl fascinating. Carl will be on the program in the future. It's okay. You're not going to, my soul's not going to hell because I've had Carl on the program. I have people on from all walks of life, all different types of theology. It's okay to have people from other walks of life on the program, all different beliefs, to find out their stories and to find out what it is they've been through in life, and to figure out what makes them tick. I think if we quieted down just a little bit and got more people's stories, found out what shaped them, found out what made their world go around, instead of being quick to judge and screaming at them about our beliefs before and what made their beliefs wrong and our beliefs right, rather than sitting down and listening to what shaped their lives and got them to believe what they believe and listening to them, I think our world would go around a lot smoother. And it's okay to have a spirited discussion and to talk about how one person went through their journey. Carl's had a fascinating life. Now, does it mean you agree with that person's life? You don't have to. You don't have to at all. You don't have to agree with Carl's life at all. But it is intriguing. And some of the things he's learned along the way are intriguing. Doesn't mean that you're going to go out and practice it tomorrow. But it doesn't mean that you can't sit down and read about it. And that you can't see how he came to his conclusions. What I find fascinating in his book, and I'll just leave it at this. You know, Carl does say he's incredibly anti-Christian. As a Christian, that took me aback, reading that. But I get why. The reason he's so anti-Christian is because they're quick to action, not just to words. He's okay with words. But they're quick to action, quick to judge, quick to action, based on something is a different theological belief. And there's a reason I brought up a certain question during the interview today. And that was the question about Jesus being a magician and creating miracles. And that we could, Jesus said we could do this ourselves. We didn't need him to do this. To point out the parallels between Christianity and what it is that he believes in. That really there's not much difference. There's a thin line. I know you're going to start to sing the song. There's a thin line between love and hate. There's a thin line between good and evil. It's just a step to the left or a step to the right, right? You fall on one side or the other. But the energy is there. The energy is the same. The energy is very powerful. It's emotion. But there's magic on either side. And I think people don't realize that. We do shut ourselves off from the magical in Christianity. We don't allow ourselves to believe that we have access to the magical in Christianity. It's not allowed. Which might be a mistake. It's called the Gnostic Bible, and it's forbidden in a lot of Christianity. Something to think about this weekend. Okay, so just a little something to kick around. But but again, kind of save your fingers. On I'll continue to bring up different views on the show because I find different people fascinating. And I hope you do too. I hope you, when you listen to the show, you like to take these different walks down different paths with different people to find out their stories. Because again, that's one of the reasons I got into journalism. Because I loved to see different people's stories. So I hope you enjoy taking these little walks with me and kind of jumping into different people's stories and different people's heads and seeing how they operate. And I find Carl incredibly fascinating, especially with the life he's had and the people he's known. So, and I don't apologize for a minute when it comes to interviewing him. With that, let's move on. The other thing I wanted to mention about Carl, too, is what's interesting. Carl and I were talking off air. In the book, he also mentions that one of his relatives is Charlemagne, which happens to be the same relative of mine as well. We have a relative in common, and then we both kind of laughed about it. Half the world is related to Charlemagne. I don't know if you know that or not. I think Charlemagne got around. Or it's a common relative, one or the other. Then it reminded me of something that I had said to my father's lady friend at my nephew's wedding, and that's this. If you look at everybody in the world, they're really separated by like a chromosome or two from being related to each other. There's really very little that separates us on this grand scale. We have to be careful about what it is that we separate ourselves in society. You know, the old tropes of racism and classism, different things that we try to separate ourselves with are outdated. They're horrible. There really isn't much separating us. We're all human beings. And we're not all that far away from all being related to each other anyways, as far as science is concerned. Especially if you ever take a spin on Ancestry and really see how closely related you are to some of your friends, boyfriends or girlfriends. Seriously, look up some of your exes and then see how close you come when it comes to different relatives. It will scare you. There's one or two relatives that get you really, really close to that ex. Trust me, you'll be frightened. With that in mind, I want to talk about other family. Family right now that is suffering in Florida. Take a more serious turn here. As I record this, it's Wednesday night. Milton is hammering Florida very hard. I'm praying real hard right now that the people who were left behind, and I do say left behind because not everybody had the choice to evacuate, are safe. That they were able to shelter in place, that they were able to do it safely, that they're able to ride out this storm with very little property damage and no ill effects. I'm keeping track of at least 24 friends, if not more, right now that are scared to death. I watched a couple of video feeds tonight of friends that are scared out of their minds. And got a hold of some relatives that are just a little bit north of the major. I mean, they're still having winds and rains and stuff like that, but they're on higher ground. So they're a little bit out of the evacuation area. It's a tough situation, folks. It really is. I chose to do shows this week because I knew that you guys need entertainment other than what's going on in Florida to keep your mind off of things, especially the people who are in Florida who would like to keep their mind off of what's going on. Maybe they need something else to listen to. Maybe they just are getting sick of the sound of the wind pounding the house and the rain hitting the roof. That's why I'm here. But I'm also here to let you know that there's an entire listening audience that is not only praying for you, but I'm also asking that they reach out with those same devices that they're listening on. Find somebody reliable that they can text donations to an organization that will get down there the minute this is over to help clean up and to help get supplies down to you guys. Because we all need to band together right now to help Florida. Man, they've been devastated the last 3-4 weeks. So we can band together and do the ultimate fall project and really get Florida back on its feet once and for all. We need to show the rest of the world that we have our stuff together. Because what's happened to Florida has been devastating. And we need to come together right now, brothers and sisters, as a country, and back up those brothers and sisters in Florida. And show them we love them, we care about them. We're going to get them out of it. We're going to help them. Help them get back on their feet. And we'll get back to life as normal. And then we can bitch and complain at each other all we want. Like a family does. But now's the time to put down our swords and pick up our shovels. That's what we need to do right now. Do whatever you can, folks, this weekend. Be a light in someone's darkness. Help out as soon as you can. Use that device in your hand for good. Donate this weekend, if you can, please. That's what I ask of you. Also, if you're in the Twin Cities area, Jess and Natalie, Jessica Freeberg and Natalie Fowler, on Friday, have a book signing on Friday night over on the West End. If you are feeling like heading out on Friday night, they will be at Canvas Convergence on the West End from 6 to 9 p.m. So go on out, get yourself a hug, get a couple of autographed books. Let Jessica and Natalie know that you are supporting them. So we ask you to do that for our Darkness Radio family. So please do that. 6 to 9 p.m. over at Canvas Convergence on the West End in St. Louis Park, Minnesota. So please do that Friday, October 11th. And check out the darknessradioshow.com store. So there you go. Those are your assignments for this weekend. Help out Florida. First and foremost, get on your listening device. Get on your device. Find an organization that is helping to rebuild Florida, actually with boots on the ground. $5, $10, whatever you can spare. $1, $5, $10, whatever you have. 2, if you're in the Twin Cities area, go support Jessica and Natalie. 3, check out the store if you got time. All right? That'll do it. Boy, we have huge shows next week. Huge shows. Remember that show I asked you to check out on Discovery? The Lost Monster Files? Remember that one? See if you can check it out this weekend. Because I got a little hint for you next week. I might hear a couple people on the show. October is huge, folks. October is huge on the show. Keep listening to the show. Got big True Crime Tuesday shows, big Darkness Radio shows coming up in the month of October. Keep it right here. All right? So, for Jessica Freeberg, for Mally Fox, for Beer City Bruiser, I want to thank you from the bottom of all our hearts for spending your hard-earned time with us right here. We appreciate it more than you know. We'll see you right back here next week for the best in true crime and paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio.